What I'm finding a lot with teams, management teams, leadership teams, operational teams, is that in any group of people, there are going to be different kind of profiles and different personalities. What I'm finding a lot, though, is that people are kind of jumping into two groups, self-professed. So there's the loud voices, and then the quiet voices. And each have their own frustration with each other. You know, the loud voices, you might call them confident. You know, they're happy to speak their mind in meetings and conversations. They don't hold back. They've always got something to share. They're decisive. Well, they can be. They can also be seen as impatient by others. You know, they're keen for people to keep up with them because they tend to move quite fast, which is not necessarily always a good thing. They'll step over things or miss things, but they will become impatient when other people aren't as fast as them in their thinking or in their making decisions, wanting to move forward. They also judge the quiet ones, or the quiet voices, let's say. They judge them as not saying what they mean or just not speaking up at all. And so they get frustrated and think that they have to fix everything because they're not hearing from other people. They're not hearing from what they might be calling the quiet people or the quiet voices or quieter than them. So then we have the quiet voices, let's say, and these people are usually quite thoughtful and considered. They're going to be quite respectful of people and not want to talk over the top of people. They won't interrupt. They'll consider that disrespectful or rude. They appreciate and really need space and time to think, to process their thoughts and feelings, you know, their ideas about what's happening or what they want to contribute. And they also need space in the meeting or in the conversation. So they'll wait for a gap. Usually with the loud voices in the room, they're not going to get a gap. So that's where one of the challenges arise. So they're waiting for this gap and it's just not showing up. So they also prefer to be invited. I was driving down one of the local streets in South Melbourne and coming up to a roundabout, and I noticed two people on the side of the pedestrian crossing, and they actually waited for me to stop, to look, and to actually invite them across. And I had a little giggle to myself because it was occurred for me as those people might be the quiet voices in a space or in a room, not bad or worse or good or different, really just actually different, you know, to each other. But those people who might be loud voices, they're not going to wait to be invited. They're going to actually penetrate a conversation and speak their voice, which might occur for these people as quite rude. And so they'll judge these people, judge the loud voices as impatient, taking up all the space, maybe selfish, and yes, rude. So what do we do when we've got teams and groups of people who are loud voices and quiet voices who need to get along, who actually need to do more than get along? How do we resolve this conundrum? So in our work, one of the things that I talk about with teams is how to move from being a group of high-performing individual experts into a high-performing team. Now, what is a high-performing team? Well, in my definition and in our work, a high-performing team is one that has brave chats, can run fast together or slow, but have real conversations as they do that. Trust is present, and a particular type of trust that allows for emotional safety, where everyone gets a voice, everyone has space and is respected, and people are asking questions of each other rather than just forcing their opinion. So they're just some of the distinctions of what I call a high-performing team. What I find is that most teams are stuck in this space of being cooperative, thinking that that's the best it's going to get. And the other word I use for this is tolerating each other. So a group of high-performing experts tolerating each other because they don't really know how to build that deeper trust. They'll click with some people in the team, have great relationships with some, easy flowing, connected relationships, and then with others, it'll be difficult, awkward. They'll probably avoid each other and only come to meetings for conversations when they have to. And a lot of organizations, as I said before, think that this is as good as it gets. And then there's just the grind. When people aren't working well together or are just tolerating each other, it's tough. It's hard work. It's burnout potential. What can happen is if we don't do anything about being at this state, we can move down into a state of disconnection or disconnected teams. And this is when teams are really siloed. So if you think of Patrick Lencioni's work around the number one team, when we're disconnected in a team as leaders or managers, what happens is our people won't feel safe to go to their counterparts in other teams or other functions. They'll come up to us as managers, expect us to go across to the manager of the other person who will then address that issue. So there's no cross-function collaboration, which slows business down. And then we're looking for processes to resolve things. And actually, it's really about human beings connecting and having brave chats with each other. Again, if nothing's addressed here, then it can move into a state of dysfunction. And that's where I call surviving. People are just really surviving, trying to get things done, not even lifting their eyes to really attempt to cross the silos. I worked with a group a couple of years ago in that state. It was really difficult for people as people were really emotionally and mentally harmed in that space. So we don't want to just leave people at cooperative because, as I said, if we don't do anything, they're going to waterfall down into this potential state. So we want to actually move up into a state of connection or being connected as a team. And this here is a really important step. And this is moving from tolerating into a place of understanding. I'll come back to this in a second because this is a really important part of moving into a state of collaboration or a collaborative team, which is really then, I think, a caring team, because we're looking for opportunities to have different kinds of conversations and actually asking questions of each other rather than just trying to get our voices heard. And from there, we're moving into a state of being united, not agreeable, not amiable, but united. An united team that will have brave conversations. As I said before, this is our high-performing team. So the moment of truth really and the opportunity here is moving from this state of being cooperative into being connected. And for me, this is the breakthrough. This is where teams really start to build a different kind of momentum. This is a place where we'll loop and we'll just be in fix-it mode, sort of like short-term focus. When actually, as we move up the scale, we're now moving into a place where we can focus strategically, look laterally rather than just within our own team. And this piece from cooperation or cooperative to connected, what does this take? So if this is the breakthrough, right, what does this take? And it starts with everybody taking responsibility for understanding themselves first. So this is where people need to lead themselves. They need to have awareness. They need to be given space to learn how to have compassion for themselves. Because if we don't have compassion for ourselves, if we don't practice that, we cannot give it to others. So this state of understanding requires us to understand ourselves as human beings first, before we can come out of this state of tolerating each other into one of actually wanting to be connected. And if I want to be connected with you, it means I've got to be somehow connected with myself, because otherwise I have no interest in you, no interest in your plight or what you're dealing with. All I'm interested in is myself and getting myself and my team across the line. So moving from a group of high-performing individual experts into a high-performing team, this is the important piece. So you might like to think about where you or your team are at, your team of leaders, your team of managers. Where do you think they might be? Where might they be stuck? How might you recognize that? What's the language you're hearing? What's the behavior you're seeing? And start to work on moving them from this state of cooperation into a state of being connected, because once you do that, the momentum will help drive them forward up into the state of being united. It requires a constant, daily practice. Self-leadership isn't a set and forget. It's not a one-day workshop, send people and off they go. It's a state of requires transformation. So work over time in an accountability framework, and then a daily practice to help people, so that they can demonstrate and role model for their own people what it is to lead themselves. So hopefully this will be helpful for you, encourage you to reflect. And if I can support you or your team in any way to move from a state of being cooperative to connected, of course, just reach out.